In early 1942, Czechoslovakia already lived under German occupation, and the rules were clear. The occupiers did not treat resistance as a crime of individuals. They treated it as a problem of whole communities. Orders came down and punishments followed fast. Arrests, confiscations, public warnings. The point was not only to catch opponents, it was to teach everyone else what happened when anyone stepped out of line. This system worked through fear and uncertainty. People never knew which act would be called sabotage or which neighbor would be accused of helping. Police powers expanded, informers multiplied, and the legal protections that might have slowed the state simply did not exist. When the occupiers announced consequences, they rarely targeted just one person. Families suffered. Workplaces suffered. Towns and villages learned that safety depended on obedience. Collective punishment sat at the center of that policy because it solved two problems at once. It crushed real opposition, and it discouraged imagined opposition. A single incident could justify sweeping raids, hostages, and executions meant to be talked about, not hidden. Terror became routine, almost administrative. The occupation did not need constant battles to win control. It needed a population that policed itself because it feared what the state might do next. In the autumn of 1941, Berlin sent a new man to tighten its grip. Reinhard Heydrich arrived in Prague as acting Reich protector, and the change showed fast. He did not treat fear as a byproduct of occupation. He treated it as the method. Authority shifted away from slow, routine repression and toward a system that moved quickly and punished publicly. The message was simple. Obedience was not negotiated. Heydrich consolidated power by turning the security police into the center of government. Lists of suspects grew. Raids became predictable, then constant. People disappeared for small acts, careless words, old ties. Arrests no longer looked like investigations. They looked like warnings. Executions followed, often after summary proceedings that offered no real defense. Each killing served two purposes at once. It removed a person and it instructed everyone watching. This was terror made systematic. The occupation did not simply react to resistance, it preempted it by making daily life feel conditional. Workplaces, unions, and community networks were penetrated and broken apart. Informers and files replaced trust. When violence came, it came with paperwork, schedules, and quotas that made it seem normal. Under Heydrich, governance and punishment merged, and the space for safe, quiet dissent shrank towards zero. By early 1942, fear alone did not end resistance. It reshaped it. Across the protectorate, small networks passed messages, hid weapons, gathered names, and watched German movements. They worked with almost no room for error, because one arrest could unravel everything. Outside the country, the Czechoslovak government in exile pushed for an action that would prove the nation still fought. The question was no longer whether to resist, it was how far to go. That pressure produced a plan with a single dangerous goal: kill Heydrich. The operation received a name, Anthropoid, and it relied on two trained men sent in from Britain, dropped by parachute and absorbed into the underground. They needed safe houses, guides, couriers, and false papers. Every step depended on civilians who would gain nothing and risk everything. The logic was brutal but clear. If Heydrich lived, terror stayed organized. If he died, Berlin would answer. The planners understood the price. Collective punishment already existed, and Heydrich had made it faster and more methodical. An assassination attempt invited reprisals that could reach far beyond the people involved. Still, preparation continued, routes studied, routines tracked, weapons secured, signals arranged. It was not a spontaneous strike. It was a decision carried forward day by day under the expectation that innocent people might pay for it, and now the attempt moved from planning into motion. On the 27th of May 1942, Heydrich travelled through Prague in an open car, following a route he treated as routine. 2 resistance operatives waited for the moment they could not take back. As the car slowed at a sharp turn, the attack came fast and imperfect. 1 weapon failed. A second charge detonated beside the vehicle. Heydrich did not die there, but he was badly wounded. Within minutes, the occupation authorities treated the attack as a test of control. The response turned immediate and official. Roadblocks spread across the city and out into the countryside. Homes were searched, names were checked, then checked again. The Gestapo and police pushed arrests at speed, pulling in suspects, relatives, and anyone who looked connected. Fear stopped being background noise. It became an order. Now the threat went public and unmistakable. The Nazis announced that anyone who helped the attackers, even indirectly, would bring consequences not only on themselves, but on entire families and communities. Rewards were offered for information, and the penalties for silence were spelled out in the same breath. It was collective punishment written into policy, with a manhunt as its engine and retaliation as its promised end. In early June 1942, Heydrich died from his wounds. The assassination attempt turned into a death, and that changed everything. In Berlin, the leadership treated it as an open challenge to Nazi rule. Orders followed quickly. The response had to be public, crushing, and unmistakable. Not just arrests, not just executions. An example. Something meant to shock an entire country into obedience, and to warn anyone watching from outside. The hunt widened immediately. Police units and SS investigators worked day and night, pushing through lists of suspects, interrogations, and raids. But they still lacked the one thing they needed most: the actual attackers. Pressure rose from above, and the investigation shifted in a dangerous way. It stopped being only about finding guilty men. It became about finding any link, any contact, any rumor that could justify a punishment large enough to satisfy the demand for revenge. That was the new phase after Heydrich's death, vengeance with a deadline. The regime wanted a place to strike because a village could not escape, and a village could be destroyed in full view. Investigators searched for pretexts like evidence, even when it was thin or forced. They followed letters, names, and hearsay, then squeezed people until something sounded usable. The target did not have to be truly responsible. It only had to serve the message. Investigators needed results, and fast. After Heydrich's death, the hunt for the attackers turned into a hunt for anyone who could be presented as their support network. Pieces of information came in from everywhere. Rumors, intercepted letters, anonymous tips. One thread pointed toward Lidice, not because it fit the facts, but because it could be made to fit. A few names and coincidences were treated like proof. That was enough to start building a case. The evidence did not hold up on its own, so it was forced to hold up. People were arrested and questioned until they repeated what investigators wanted to hear. Statements were shaped through threats, exhaustion, and fear for family members. Small details were exaggerated into a supposed chain of contact with the assassins. Every denial looked suspicious. Every uncertainty became guilt. In the end, the investigation stopped being about finding the attackers. It became about selecting a place that could pay for them. Lidice then became useful in a different way. It was close enough to reach quickly, ordinary enough to send a message, and already marked by this manufactured link to the attack. Officials treated the village as a symbol, not a community. The decision hardened into policy. An annihilation that would be public, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. The point was not justice. The point was demonstration, proof to the entire region and to Europe of what resistance would cost. Late on 9th of June 1942, German units moved in and sealed Lidice off from the outside world. Roads and paths fell under guard. No one left and no one entered. The order was not an arrest or a search. It was a closure, meant to make the village helpless and to keep the rest of the region from seeing what came next. In hours, an accusation turned into an operation. Before dawn on the 10th of June, the population was forced into control. Families were split apart, quickly and without explanation. Men were pulled away from women and children and held under guard while the village stayed surrounded. Then the executions began. Small groups of men were taken out and shot again and again until the adult male population was wiped out. This was not punishment aimed at one suspect. It was punishment aimed at everyone. With the men killed, the operation shifted to the place itself. German forces started clearing homes and setting buildings on fire, turning a living community into a target to be removed. The destruction was carried out step by step, as if following a checklist: isolate, separate, execute, burn. By that morning, Lidice stopped being treated as a village. It was treated as an example, made real through violence. After the men's executions, the women of Lidice were not released or questioned and sent home. They were treated as part of the sentence. They were forced into transport and carried away from the place where their families had lived, toward Ravensbrück, the concentration camp built for women in northern Germany. There, names and lives were reduced to numbers and labour. The point was not only punishment, it was removal. For the children, the break was even sharper. They were gathered and held apart, then sorted by officials who decided their futures from paperwork and quick inspections. A small number were selected for Germanization, taken to be renamed, reshaped, and placed into German households or institutions, as if their origins could be overwritten. The rest were loaded onto transports that did not lead to prisons or camps for work. They led to killing centres. This was where the crime widened. Lidice was not only destroyed in one night, it was emptied across borders and bureaucracies. Mothers vanished into Ravensbrück with no clear record for families to follow. Children disappeared into new identities or into death, leaving almost nothing that could be traced back. The massacre became a process, not a moment. It turned collective punishment into enforced disappearance on an organized scale. After the killings and deportations, the Nazi leadership treated Lidice as something to be deleted. The village name disappeared from signs and maps. Buildings got levelled, the ruins cleared, even the cemetery dug up, as if physical removal could erase the crime itself. At the same time, the destruction became a message. Official reports and staged photographs framed it as justice, meant to warn every occupied town what defiance would cost. But the war did not freeze in that moment of terror. As Germany's fortunes shifted, the certainty behind those warnings weakened. News of Lidice spread beyond the occupiers' control and turned into evidence of what Nazi rule looked like in practice. When the fighting ended, investigators followed paper trails left by police officers, rail schedules, and camp records. Survivors returned from imprisonment carrying names, dates, and missing faces the regime had tried to make vanish. Post-war proceedings did not rebuild the dead, but they tested a new idea, that state crimes could be documented, assigned, and judged. Prosecutors and commissions pieced together responsibility from commanders to local enforcers and from administrators who organized transports to those who signed orders. For the women and the scattered children, testimony became a form of recovery, and the village name became fixed again, no longer a target, but a record. Erasure failed, Remembrance became the outcome. Lidice existed again, but it did not return as if nothing had happened. It stood rebuilt nearby, and it stood marked. The village no longer carried only daily life. It carried instruction. What had once been done in the dark before dawn now stayed in full view, named and explained, because forgetting had been the point of the original crime. Memory became the answer. The memorial did not only mourn the dead, it showed a method. It made clear how a state used fear to control millions by punishing a few, then claimed it as order. Lidice became evidence that collective punishment was not an accident of war, but a chosen tool. Visitors learned the sequence: suspicion, selection, annihilation, and the message sent outward. Over time, Lidice reached beyond one country. Its name entered the language of war crimes as a warning sign, a case people pointed to when leaders targeted communities for what they supposedly represented. The rebuilt village and its memorial pressed one conclusion into public memory. When civilians were punished as a group, the crime was not smaller because it was systematic. It was larger